Hello everyone, welcome to Service Just Plus Masterclass 2022. We're in the second season and the third episode. So, to give a quick recap of our previous episodes, we saw how you can build and design templates to gather information and how you can use automations to make your processes more efficient. In this episode, we're going to see how you can build life cycles and workflows on a visual builder to standardize the ITSM processes like request management, change management, and so on. I'm Steffi Benjamin here, and I will be your user educator for the day. The agenda for this session is we're going to see how you can craft visual workflows and life cycles to automate and streamline ITSM practices. So we have a few features in Service Desk Plus that can help you achieve this. We have request lifecycle, change and release workflows, Gantt chart, and milestones and task dependencies. So we'll now go ahead and see the various ITSM practices like request management, change management, project management, and how these workflows and life cycles can help us. Now, Zilker is a use case we use in all of our masterclass to help you understand the various how the various features in service displays are applicable in a real-time organization. For this session, Zilker will be an up-and-coming game development company. Now, Zilka has been managing its assets and user information through cloud service, but they have decided to acquire another company which has a similar size of workforce. And this acquired company has been managing its data regarding assets and users on on premise applications. Now, Zilka needed a way to bring in and merge both the workforces together while migrating their data from on premise to cloud application. Now, with two major tasks in hand, you can understand that there were a lot of tickets raised during the process, and the agents at Zilker resolved them in a half-assed manner because they were not able to keep up with the tasks. And without a proper standard operating procedure in place, their processes were not streamlined. So now Zilker decided that they need to bring about a change in their existing policies because with their workforce literally doubled, their existing policies could not be applicable to the acquired companies, departments, or their assets. So, what are the major pain points for Zilker? Number one was, like I just said, the agents at Zilker did not handle the incoming tickets properly. So, which meant that they were just providing a general resolution and resolving the ticket without taking time to check if the resolution is applicable for all cases. And two, they did not have a proper structure change enablement process in place. So, this led to increased risks and loss in IT infrastructure. So, which meant that if you don't plan your changes well, so Zilker is now transitioning from an existing workforce to literally doubling its workforce in one day. So, which meant that Zilker had to make sure that the merger goes well, and if it doesn't, there could be risks and loss to how their business processes occur. And while planning for their policy changes, when they deploy such policies, Zilker needed a way to organize them and deploy them. But without doing it, they ended up facing a lot of business downtime. Now, for any company, business downtime could mean negative impact on the profits directly. So, without a proper release management in place, Zilker had this problem. And overall, the agents felt that they did not have proper visibility into what is the current progress of the project, and they were not able to judge the proper project completion deadline in place. So, hence, they faced inevitable delays and overall chaos. Now, enter Service Displays. How could an application like Service Displays help Zilker standardize its ITSM practices with visual workflows and life cycles? Now, with Service Displays, you can bring about the various features we just saw about in the agenda, like request lifecycle, workflows, and Gantt chart from project management, and so on, to help Zilker transition smoothly. Now, the first feature we'll be looking about is request lifecycle. Now, Zilker needed a way to guide its technician with a standard operating procedure for not only handling the incoming tickets, but also to deliver services simultaneously. Request management usually has two phases. One is incidents, where your end users are logging issues saying that they're not having they're not able to complete the day-to-day tasks. Simultaneously, they will also be raising service requests saying, I need something to proceed with my work. Now, the agents at Zilker needed a standard operating procedure for handling both and not go overboard or ignore one of them. So, using request lifecycle, Zilker can fulfill its service requests and resolve incident requests swiftly. And we'll go into the application and see how this can be achieved. So, once you log into Service Displays, I'm logging in as the administrator. You can select the IT portal, and if you are a technician or an administrator, this is the screen you will be greeted with. And to configure lifecycle and workflows, you need to go to the admin tab here. And in the automation block, that's where we have our request lifecycle and our workflows. So the lifecycle is what I wanted to talk to you first. So a lifecycle, like I was explaining earlier, it's a way to set up a completely standardized process in place. But a lifecycle is much more than that. Imagine Zilker. They are having an existing workforce, a number of agents, let's say 10 agents, and they might be monitoring all their issues and so on. Now, with their workforce literally doubled, they might be facing twice the number of incidents, twice the number of service requests, but the same 10 agents handling all of that. So, Zilker now needed a way to quickly train the agents in the acquired company and so that they can share the workload and get things done faster. But training users in your policies and in your business procedures is no easy task. So, how could Zilker find a way to guide their technicians without investing too much time and also helping them understand the process at the same time? That is where request lifecycle comes into place. Instead of writing like a huge documentation telling your users this is the procedure and having them refer to it each and every time, you can simply configure the entire process workflow in a visual builder, and service displays will guide the agents at the right time. We'll go ahead and see how it's done. Now, to set up the lifecycle and draft it, we'll first need to create a lifecycle with basic details. You can provide the name and description and select the templates to which the lifecycle is applicable. Now, we have, let's say I want to create a lifecycle for onboarding users from the acquired or merged company. So, any request that is created with the service template will have the lifecycle applied automatically. Now, if I want the same life cycle to be handled for certain incidents, I can also associate them, and the life cycle will be created automatically. I'm sorry, associated automatically with the requests. Now, I'm not going to create one right now, but once you do create, you will be taken to a canvas similar to the one on my screen. Now, this is your canvas where you configure your workflow or your life cycle, and you will notice that there are various white color shapes which refer to the statuses in a request. Now, it's quite well known that request goes through various status. Once you create, it's open, and then a technician might upgrade that it's in progress, saying that they are working on it. And if it's assigned, it would mean that a specific technician or an agent is assigned to work on the request. And if it is resolved, it might move to a resolved state and finally closed state. Now, you can also configure more custom statuses like product issue analysis, trigger RCA, and so on. This is completely up to you. If you want to create new statuses, in the admin tab, we have a customization block where we can configure any number of statuses. So all the statuses you configure will be listed here along with the default statuses. If you want to add them, you can simply drag and drop them to where you need them on the canvas. And if I want to connect it to the workflow, I can hover over any existing status, drag the connector link and drop it. So always make sure that the output node is on the input node and not the other way around. Or don't connect an input node to an input node. For example, um, this would be incorrect because you're putting, I'm sorry. Okay. Uh, okay. So what I was about to say is don't end up with wrong connector paths. So once you've configured that, you can go forward and let me say it's closed. Now you can notice that there's a status here, and we have what is called transitions in between, which would be these green color boxes. So the transitions are sorry, the transitions are certain actions that can be performed on the request as the request transitions from one status to another status. So you can provide a transition name, a description that will help your technicians or the SD admins understand what this transition is about. I'm just going to give none for now, and some help text. I can say uh, wrong template used, just for reference. Now, the difference between description and help text is this description will be shown only to an SD admin while they're configuring the workflow so that they can understand what the transition is. But the help text will be shown to the technician who's handling the ticket. So if they want to transition, this help text will pop up and say what this transition means, so they will know whether or not to use the transition. Now, I'm not going to add this anymore. So I'm going to show you with the existing workflow what are the other features that are present. So some of the major features I want to talk about is that in each transition, you have three phases. You have the before, during, and after phase. In the before phase, you can configure which roles can even view and select the transition, and what are the rules that must be satisfied for the transition to even be displayed. For example, let's say as I create the request, I only want technicians within the support group to view this transition. And also, I want to make sure that my, let's say, my department is not empty. So only if this criteria is satisfied and the technician has this role, only then they'll be even able to see the transition. If they don't see the transition, they cannot select it and the request will not proceed any further. So this will help you give a role-based access to certain transitions. So let's say a specific technician handling the request does not have permissions to close the request, in which case you can configure the permissions in the before transition or the before phase. In the during transition, though, you can configure actions to be performed when a request moves from open to in progress state. So here I have mandated notes saying if the technician selects the transition, then we will ask the users to add a note. I can also add optional fields like impact. Let me select a few fields and resolution. So this would mean that I can add the note, I can make this optional, meaning I can prompt my users to enter the details or I can avoid it. And then we have rules. So here I can configure rules to be applied automatically. Now remember I said request lifecycles are part of automations. So naturally they would have certain automation rules coming in with them. So for during transitions, you have a page up here. Now, if you have been a part of a previous masterclass for business rules, you would have noticed that this is quite similar to business rules. You provide a name and description, and you can set the cascade execution. Meaning, if you have multiple rules configured in the during transition itself, you can say if you want to execute the next rule, or if a certain rule is executed, you can skip the remaining rules, and you can select the criteria for which the rule should be applied. If a request reaches a transition but the criteria is not met, then the rule will not be applied automatically. So you can provide a criteria and you can execute certain actions. So you can either execute custom functions, which will help you perform any action within Service Desk Plus. Now, custom functions are written using Deluge code, which is Zoho's proprietary coding language. So, for example, I would use custom function to say, if a request reaches this particular status, then I would want it to be associated with a purchase request or a contract automatically. Or I can trigger reports when a request moves to a certain status, and so on. So you can perform any number of action. You can auto associate the request to a project or a change, or you can create a dashboard widget. Basically you are free to play around with the entire application using custom functions. And if you're not familiar with Deluge, you can use execute scripts to create Python based scripts and then upload them to perform the necessary action. We also have field update, which is inbuilt. So you basically select a field and say the existing request has impact as high. I'm sorry, impact as low, and you can use the field update to update the impact value as high. Even if the request has a field value, you can override it, or if you don't want it to be overridden, then you can simply leave it. So if the request has no field, no value in the selected field, the value will be applied. If it is having an existing value, then the field will not be updated. Now another interesting option is abort process. So abort process means you can simply say that If this criteria is met, then you don't want the request to proceed any further. I will take you to an existing rule. Let me clear this. Yes. So here I have an abort process configured. So I have said, if my service category is not user management, then this means that this request does not have the right service category assigned. In which case, let's abort it and say that you have used an incorrect template to create this request. Kindly contact your sysadmin to update the request to the right template. So this is how abort process works. And then we have the after transition. Now after transition will execute certain actions after the request moves to the next state. Now we are in this transition here. So after a request is updated as open, I'm sorry, after a request is updated as open, this rule will be executed wherein and sending a notification. Or if I want to configure more different actions, I can also configure, like if the request moves from open to in progress, we can create a new rule to execute custom functions or webhooks as well. Now, both during transition rules and after transition rules are quite similar, as in they have the same cascade execution options. You again have the way to select a criteria. If no criteria is selected, then the rule will be applied to all requests. And but the actions vary for both. In during transition, you would have seen you only had field update, custom function, and execute script. In after transition, you can send notifications, or you can do webhook calls. Now, webhook calls will help you make place calls to third-party applications. For example, let's say you have a Jira ticket running simultaneously, tracking the same exact thing. So using webhook, you can say if the request reaches a particular status, then you can update the status in the Jira ticket simultaneously. So you can create a webhook and place a call to Jira application. So when the request reaches a status, the Jira ticket is also updated. Now, this is how the before, during, and after phases of your transition work. And here, Zilker has decided to create a life cycle to integrate its employee details alone. So to migrate the employee details in the on-premise area application, to migrate it from on-premise to cloud application. So we have said first we'll check the request description, and if it's open, we check the employee ID, and we have given the help text here to guide our technicians and say if they have a proper employee ID, we need to assign them a new ID. And then we go to in progress. Now here you might notice things get a little bit interesting. We have branched the workflow or the life cycle into two ways. One is I've said if the we either provide them ID card and access, or we check if the employee is at the end of their tenure and proceed to move the request to on hold. Here again, I've branched my request and said if the employee is willing to continue, we restart the process, or if they are not willing to continue, we initiate the termination procedure and we cancel the request while moving it to a different group. Now, if the employee is someone who's just planning to continue anyway without no plans to resign, then we just provide them with ID card and they require access to various portals or channels and support groups. And then we assign the request to a technician. Now, the technician has to check if the employee wants new services or products. For example, Zilker might be acquiring a company that has a completely new division which might not be present in Zilker. Now, as the merger is happening, the new division employees might request for certain services that or a request to continue using certain services that Zilker has not provided previously. Now Zilka has to bring about policy changes and provide them and find a way to continue providing them the services or the products. So in which case the technician can select this transition, raise a purchase order, and then proceed further. Or they can simply, if the employee doesn't need anything extra, they can simply add the employee to the relevant platforms they have, maybe a way to connect or an intra-company group and so on, and move the request to resolve state. And once they obtain the user's confirmation, they can close the request and the request would reach the end of its life, which is the end node. Now, we have created an entire procedure here. Let's save the draft and publish it. Now, we'll go into a request, and you can see that I have a request here. So I have already created a request, and like I said, if you select the right template while creating a request, the lifecycle will be applied automatically. So to select a template, we have a template field. So if you were creating a new request, you would have this template field where you can select the template, and And once it is created, you would notice that the life cycle is present here. Now, we don't have the entire diagram in the request details page, but we do have the transitions. And this is what I meant by saying we guide the technicians in the right. Now, we have just created the request, which means it's in start node, and there is only one transition where it says we check. I'm sorry, we are in the start open node, and since the condition was satisfied, we move to the open node, and we have only one transition saying check employee ID. So here we hover over it, and the end user can, I'm sorry, the technician can see the help text that we have given there. So they can understand what the transition is and select it. And once they select, you will notice that the field mandate we gave earlier about adding the nodes is present here. So you can say user confirmed and update it, and the field is updated, and you would see that the request moves to in progress state. And now in progress state, we have a branch where we say we find if the employee is someone willing to continue, or if they are at the end of their tenure and they've already submitted for resignation, which case you can hover over them and you can see the help text appear. So if a technician now knows if he selects this transition, he has to go ahead and provide an ID card with relevant access to the employee, or if he selects the second transition, he has to do this only if the employee has submitted for resignation or the contract is nearing the end. Now, let's say the technician finds that the employee is someone willing to continue and he decides to provide them with ID card. You will notice the status is again updated automatically. So, like this, you can continue, or the technician can continue going forward. And this is how Service Desk Plus guides the agent completely. So instead of, like I said earlier, instead of going through an entire document or learning the entire procedure and fumbling through, the Service Desk Plus will do the hard work, guide them, and limit them to either two or three pathways, or even sometimes four or five if needed. And so the technicians will know which is the right flow this request should take. Now, if they decide to add the employees, you can simply say success and update it. You can see the request is resolved, and you can update user confirmation either through email or through notes or something. And once the user confirms, you give yes and close the request, and you would see that the request is closed. So this is how request lifecycle is used in real time. So we'll now go ahead back into the presentation and we'll see the various features we discussed. We first saw how you can build a lifecycle using a graphical user interface. We saw how you can add transitions and drag and drop status into the canvas. We then saw how you can configure notifications in after transition, and how you can configure other actions like mandating fields in during transition and so on. We also saw how you can perform other custom functions like using webhooks, doing field updates, and executing scripts, and so on. Now, the next feature I want to talk about is how we can help Zelker bring about policy changes in the organization to meet the demands of a larger workforce using systematic change and release workflows. Now, like I explained earlier, Zilker needed a way to reduce the risk associated with the change while also deploying their release in an organized manner. For this, we have change and release workflows. We'll go ahead and see how those are configured. So, going to the admin tab, we have workflows here. So, by default, you're in the change tab, which has change workflows. You can click new workflow and you will be taken to a page which is called the workflow editor. Here you can provide the name and description for the workflow. You can select the workflow as either general workflow or emergency workflow. For emergency workflows, we usually only have like two or three stages with minimal approvals so that the change can be rolled out quickly. Now, by default, we have the start and end nodes connected to the stage one and the close stage, which is the submission and the close stage. I'm sorry. So this area here would be called the canvas. So we have the submission and close node present by default. Let me add a few stages so you can drag and drop the other stages from the stencil. Now, this would be called your stencil, where we have 6 nodes present. So if I want to drag and drop stage node, I can select which stage I want here. I can add in a few statuses, and I can even configure their direction using this drag and drop motion, and click save. Now I've added a stage, a different stage between submission and close. Now, if I want to connect the two stages, I can hover over the output port in an existing stage and connect it to the input port. Now, you cannot connect an output port to an output port. This would be an error. You have to always make sure that the ports are connected from output to input and so on. And this arrow is called a connector. Now, if I can say if it's accepted, we go to implementation in progress, and once the implementation is completed, I can close the stage. But I might want to add more nodes in between, more conditions and so on. For example, I would want to make sure that my change proceeds to implementation only if a certain condition is met, in which case we have the condition node. I can drag and drop the condition node. I can provide a condition name, select and say only if the category is general, we proceed further. And now we see we have two ways of doing this. I can say once the submission is accepted, we check the condition. If the category is general, we go to in progress. If the condition is not satisfied, in which case we reject the change. This is how a condition node works. You have two ways to define the workflow based on yes or no answers. But in some cases, a yes or no answer is not enough. You might have multiple field values or more complicated answers present. In which case, you can use a switch node. You can drag and drop a switch node and select a field which has more than two values. Again, let's say I am selecting this field, and we have three answers here: yes, needs modification, and new policy needed. So I can click save, and you will notice that we have three nodes. Let me remove this. So here I've said once it's completed, we check the switch. And if it is yes, I would, if the existing policy is applicable, that's my question. If it is yes, I can simply complete it. If it needs modification, in which case I can send a notification to my stakeholders. So I can click new, add a notification, select certain recipients. So I can select organization roles or cab teams or change roles and so on. And I can also add in a description to help my SD admins understand what this node is. And then I can add in subject and message, which would be sent as the notification. On clicking save, I'm choosing it, and the notification node is added. I can say needs modification, it is connected to notification node. Now, one thing I forgot to mention while talking about switch nodes is you can add any field with multiple values as the switch node, and you can also add additional fields or change additional fields as switch node, but only if it is of pick list type. So, in your admin tab under customization block, we have additional fields present, and here we have change tab where you can configure pick list type additional fields, and they can be added as a switch node. Now, going forward, we have decided to configure notification. And let's say if there is a new policy needed, then I want to add an approval node. I can simply say approval, and I can choose if I want all of my approvers to approve or just any one of them. Or I can choose to record the first response action, meaning if I have five approvers and my first approver, whoever responds to the approval email, decides to say the change is rejected, then theirs would be the final decision. Or if they say approved, it will be approved, and so on. So again, I can select any approvers. I can add cap teams, change roles, and if I have users with approval permissions, I can add them by typing out their names as well. And providing the details here, the approval node is added. So I am configuring it. And then we have the field update, which will help you enforce uh, an updated value to a field no matter what its existing value is. So I can say, let's update the impact. And even if the field has low, it will still be updated as high once the node is reached. And I can connect the approved to the field update and complete it. Now, you have to always make sure for workflows that the flow is sequential and not loopy or recursive. For example, we have in progress here. I cannot go back and give it as requested, which would mean this change would end up looping over and over, so it would be invalid. Always make sure it has a proper workflow from start to end, and no node is left hanging like here. You have to make sure they are connected to the end node as well. So this would be a complete change workflow, but I'm not going to save this. I'm going to take you to an existing workflow that I have already configured. So here you can see that we have a change with all 6 stages present, and while we have a notification node here, this would be actually called a custom notification, because you get to customize here what the message is, who you want to notify it to, and so on. We also have status notifications that are configured like this. You can hover over any status, click on this envelope icon, and say you can send the notification to anyone. And when the change reaches this particular stage and status, a notification will be triggered to the configured users. Now, these notifications are sent along with the global notifications that you configure in notification rules. So, under setup tab, under admin tab, we have global notifications in notification rules. So this is how our notifications are sent. So here we have a submission node connected to a condition. And if it is yes, we proceed to planning stage and then we go to approval. So we have not configured approval here. And instead we're going to a switch node where we are checking for if the existing value is applicable, if the existing policies are applicable. If so, we proceed to implementation. If it needs modification, we have decided to send a notification and review the modified policy before implementing it. Or if we say new policy is needed, we have decided to approve the new policy, review it, and then implement it. And once it is implemented, we do a field update saying the asset is migrated successfully, and then the change request is closed. So this is a complete workflow. I will now take you to a change request and we'll see how the workflow is applied. So I have a workflow here for migrating assets from on-premise to cloud. So here you can see the changes in submission stage, and the field values are not updated completely. For example, this field value is not assigned and this value is also not assigned. I'm drawing your attention here because they would be very vital in understanding how the workflow is assigned. So I am accepting this change and I'm saying, um, so now you can see the change workflow is not proceeding forward. So we'll go ahead and see. So this says here that the description is empty, but the description here, I'm sorry, this has to be updated. Mm, Okay, I will take you to another request that is also configured. All right. So let me edit the change details and okay. So I have again put them as not assigned and I'm accepting them. And the request moves to planning stage. Now in the planning stage, I have not configured any node. So once I click approve, I can save. But you can see the request is not moving to next stage. It is still in planning. That is because even though the status is approved, in the workflow, I have configured that only when the request is planning in progress, it will move to the next stage. So I have to ensure that the right status is also approved, is also updated. I can click save and you can see that the request moves to the approval stage. Now in the approval stage, we don't have any approval nodes configured, but if we do, the approval nodes will be reflected here and triggered to the relevant users. So once you approve and save, again, the request is not moving. Now this is because in the workflow, we have given a switch value saying, if this particular field if is the existing asset policy is applicable. If this particular field has certain values, then the change would move accordingly. But as I drew your attention earlier, the field does not have any value at all. Therefore, the workflow is paused. But once I update this, let me edit and update the field value as yes and save it. And now you would notice the change automatically moves to implementation. And in the implementation stage, I can associate the relevant projects and releases as well. Now, for a minor change, you might not need releases or projects associated, but for a major change, like migrating all the assets to a cloud based software, you would need to bring in a release module to help you plan the release in stages. And you might also need to bring in projects module to oversee the entire project. So if you want to associate or create a new project, you can do right within this stage or even for releases. So if I like to just associate an existing project, I am going to associate one and associate. So this is how you can bring in projects and releases to work in tandem with your change module. Now, ideally, we would go to the release module, plan out the release, close the release, and come back, review the change, and close the change. But for the sake of this session, I'm just going to complete this and go forward and save. And you would notice the review is over and this change is closed. Now, this is how a change workflow is applied to the request, to the change request in real time. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is release workflows. So, release workflow is again configured in the release tab, and I already have a workflow in place. This is very similar to change workflow. We have the same UI layout and everything. The only difference is a release workflow usually has more stages than a change workflow. So, while changes have 6 stages, releases have 9 stages. And you can configure as many stages as needed, or you can choose to minimize the number of stages involved as well. So here I've configured a workflow. After it is submitted, I've said we'll send a notification, move to planning stage, where we do a quick condition check. And if the conditions are satisfied, we move to development, we update a field value, and we go to testing. And once the testing is completed, we go to UAT, which is user acceptance testing, where we check out how the release is implemented in a controlled group, or in a more colloquial term, we say it is beta testing. And if it is successfully completed, we check upon another condition before deploying it to the live audience. And I've decided while deploying, based on the site, I would like to either just send a notification or configure both notification and approval. And once the site is also the site deployment is over, we are going to training the users on how to uh, manage the new policies, and then we review the entire release process and close it. Now, this is the release I have in mind. How will this be applied in a release request? We'll go ahead and see. So we have a release request present here. And one more thing I want to mention about is to associate a workflow to a change or release. You have to select the workflow while creating it. So we have a workflow present here. To select the workflow while creating a release request or a change request, and it will be associated automatically. So we have a release request here, and an interesting thing about release workflows is you can see the workflows right within the request details page. For change, the change technicians might not know why a change is passing or what are the nodes that needs to be satisfied. But for release, the technicians can see the workflow right within the details page. They can move around the nodes and stuff, but none of the changes they make here will be reflected in the workflow editor. So if I move it here, the workflow editor will not be affected, and I cannot add more changes or edit the workflow from this page. This is just to understand how the workflow is. So we are in the submission stage. Let's see if I accept it, if the change is moving forward. So I am accepting it. And the change moves to planning. Now in planning, I have said that we have a condition in place. If I hover over, I can see what the condition is. I have to make sure that the rollout and backout plan is present. So we'll check if that is available. So we have a rollout plan. I have added some a dummy content here. But let's say I haven't added a rollout plan as per my condition, and save it. In which case, if I move forward 1 minute, you would notice that we are in yellow here, which means the stage is currently being implemented. But if I haven't satisfied my condition and I try to complete it, the stage will be completed, but it will not proceed to development stage because my conditions are not satisfied. So let me just add a rollout plan and save it. And now I have to re-edit my status. Save done. And the change and the release will move to the next stage. Now again in development, we have certain actions here. So let me just complete it. Now let me provide the details and update it. And you can see it proceeds further. Now this is quite how it goes. So as each stage is reached, you have to make sure that your conditions or your field updates are performed correctly, and all the updates that you make via workflow, be it a field update or some other or if you're using any other actions like notifications, they will be sent to the right users, and things like field update will be reflected in the history tab here. So this is pretty much how the workflow does. So since this is going to be just repetitive, I'm going to skip over the remaining of part. You can easily imagine how the release would move to the closure stage. So the features we just saw were how you can design a change and release workflow using a graphical user interface called the workflow editor. We then saw how you can perform change and release movement from one stage to another stage by updating the statuses. We then saw how you can configure conditions to direct the workflow in a specific way, or how you can configure switch nodes to decide how the workflow should be. We then saw how you can send contextual notifications using notification node, and how you can also configure status notifications to specific users. And finally, we saw how you can enforce field updates using the field update node, or how you can have your users update certain details by putting in the condition node, and so on. So the next thing I want to talk about is projects module. Now Zilker needed a way to visualize the project, understand what the milestones are, and complete their tasks within a planned time. So the agents needed to gain visibility into the associated changes, releases, and everything, and plan their tasks. For this, we have the projects module in hand. Now, a project is basically a number of tasks that either need to be completed sequentially or in tandem with each other. And these tasks are sometimes grouped into various stages called milestones. So we have a project present here. I provided the details and everything. And the things I want to focus on for this session is milestones. So, a milestone, like I explained, is just a grouping of certain tasks, and each milestone would indicate a turning point in the project. So, I can add new milestone if I want, provide the title and description, and the owner of the milestone, what's the priority, and so on. And once I add a milestone, I can go inside a milestone and configure tasks for the milestone. So you would notice that certain tasks are already having an arrow here indicating that they are dependent on each other. Now, let me take you to another milestone and explain to you how dependency works. So we have tasks and we have the dependencies here. I can click on this and mark if a certain task should be executed only after a parent task is completed. For example, if I want to start diagramming what my infrastructure architecture should be, I want to first determine my business requirements. So let me select a parent. And yes, you can see that it is done. So similarly, if I want to select a parent task for this one, I can simply click select parent, select one of the green tasks. Let me try it again. And you can see that this is completed. This is how dependencies work. So this will ensure that my tasks are being executed sequentially. Now, you can only mark dependencies between tasks present in one milestone. You cannot mark dependencies for tasks and different milestones. So once you've configured all of this, you can go to the task tab. Let me take you to the task tab, where you can view all the tasks that are present in all the milestones, and you can add tasks that are not related to any milestone. And if you have any dependencies marked, they'll once again be indicated here. And if you want to view all the milestones and all the tasks visually in one place, you can go to the settings or the gear icon here, click on the project overview map, and this will give you an idea of all the milestones in the project and the tasks in each milestones and the dependencies between the set tasks. So this is how your tasks are managed. You can add new tasks if you want, select a task template or provide the details. You can either mark the task to a specific owner or you can assign it to them right away and click save. So this is how your projects milestones and tasks are managed. But one important feature I want to talk about is Gantt view. Now, Zilka had a problem with understanding what is the schedule or what is their planned time and so on. This can be completely overcome using Gantt view. A Gantt view will simply give you a bird's eye view of the entire schedule of your project. Here you can see that the various tasks are present here, highlighted based on priority. And these tasks are, I can see the task listed here and the owner of the tasks. I can also view to list them based on milestones. And here I can see the tasks in each milestone. And you will notice, let me zoom in a bit. You will notice that dependent tasks are highlighted using a faint gray line and the dependency icon. So zooming back out, this is how a Gantt view works. Now, if I want to add any more details like like comments or work log, I can add them directly by hovering over a task. I can view comments added. I can view the task details. I can update the tasks in time. So let's say I want to simply update a time. In one click, I can update the task details. And if I want to add work log, I can also say add a work log and say I have spent 30 minutes on this task so far and save it. And all these details will be updated. So a Gantt view will help me get an overall plan of what is the schedule for my tasks. And you can also filter them based on members or like it was earlier, milestones and so on. Now, what if I want to reschedule my tasks? What if I think that the schedule is too clumsy? In which case, I can go to resource management where I can instantly reschedule my tasks or reassign them to different users. Now, let's say I have a task present here and I want this to be completed earlier and I feel that a different user could do it. In which case I can drag it, drop it to where I need and it will be reassigned. Just a simple drag and drop motion. And here you can see that some tasks are not assigned to any user at all, in which case I can again drag and drop them. And if I want to change the schedule, I can hover over the start and I can simply drag it to the desired end time. So let me move it. And you would notice that if I hover over, I can see the schedule start and end times updated automatically just as I dragged them. And I can also view other task details. I can click on them to view the details and get a quick overview of the task. And if I want, I can also filter them based on priority status and their colors would be updated automatically. So this is how you plan your task schedule using Gantt view and resource management. So going back into the presentation, we saw how you can create and manage tasks in project, how you can use the Gantt chart to understand the entire schedule of your project, and how you can use resource management to reschedule tasks among users. We then saw how you can configure task dependencies and how you can use the project overview map to understand the dependencies of various tasks throughout the entire project. So we've reached the end of the presentation. A quick recap of everything we discussed so far. So first we saw about request lifecycle and how you can guide your technicians through the ticketing process using lifecycle. We then saw how you can set up transitions to help a request move from one status to another status while executing automated actions simultaneously. We then saw how you can design and deploy changes using workflows and how you can trigger various actions like notifications and field updates using workflows and request lifecycle. We finally saw how you can use projects to track milestones and tasks to get a proper understanding of how the project is going along. And we then saw how you can use the Gantt chart to understand your project deadlines. So, thank you, folks, for sticking with us. We really appreciate your participation. So, if you have any questions at any later point, you can always send them to hello@servicedisplus.com. So, as we reach the end of the session, I would like to remind you to give a quick feedback as you leave the session so that we can improve our future masterclass. And we hope to stay connected. And in the next episode, we're planning to introduce and discuss, we're planning to discuss about Microsoft Teams. So I hope to see you all again. And thank you for being a part of this.